Hello.
Hello, good morning. Today we're kicking off MetaFest talking about ethos, we're talking about conflict resolution and diversity, women in Web3. So today is all about supporting and being one together and understanding what it means to build together. So this morning I'm starting off with Richard talking about microsolidarity. Is that right?
That's me. That's what I hope to talk about. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Richard. Could you please introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about your background, and please, the floor is yours. I'll be here to answer any questions afterwards.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, start with a little presentation so people know the briefest idea about what microsolidarity is all about, and then I would love to just take questions. So if there's anyone watching the stream, please do add your questions. I find it much more interesting to respond to like people's live curiosity. What is there to say about me? I guess it's useful to know I was trained as an engineer, and I got interested in decentralized organizing because of the Occupy movement. So back in 2011, I got, I kind of went down the rabbit hole, not the crypto rabbit hole, but the democracy rabbit hole, the direct democracy, anarchist, taking responsibility for ourselves and taking the future into our own hands, that kind of rabbit hole, and got super excited about this mode of organizing that I saw at Occupy, where we did a lot of small scale direct democracy in the camps. And then there was this completely divergent, emergent swarm of activity happening all around the world where there was kind of nobody in charge, nobody calling the shots, but there were kind of like memes and themes and waves that provided some sense of coherence. But this swarm mode of organizing I found really, really exciting, and it actually gave me a sense of optimism. Like there's a lot of scary things in the future, according to me at least, and seeing the way that like hundreds of different camps got organized around the world under this headline called Occupy, without anyone having to call the shots, it gave me a sense of optimism. Like, okay, maybe as bad things happen in the world, there's this kind of like planetary immune system, this like self-organizing response that happens without any central body coordinating it, but just people responding to their local needs and local concerns with their own local resources and competencies. So that was super inspiring. And after Occupy, like the wave kind of crested and Occupy went back underground, and it was obviously never going to be a permanent full-time movement. Me and my buddies were left with the challenge of like, well, that was inspiring, but now what? Like, how do we take what was so great about that decentralized mode of organizing and make it more sustainable, make it a long-term thing and make it more accessible, make it more normal, make it more everyday. And so being trained as an engineer, my response was like, oh, we should build some software. And so we built a platform called Lumio. You can go check it out, lumio.org. And that's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like Web3 DAO tooling, but from Web 2. So because we were starting in 2011, most of us weren't really thinking about blockchains at that point. So I got really interested in building technology and like, how do we create a context where people can relate to each other as equals and everyone can work to their strengths, and there's no like dominating hierarchy, command and control system that demands people to do things they don't want to do, but much more spontaneity and freedom. And I mean, that's fun. Building technology is good. I'm proud of that work, and I think we've made a useful contribution. But after about 5 years of working on that technology platform, I just kind of got a bit bored. That technology, there's only so much you can do with a protocol. There's only so much you can do with the user interface. There's so much other stuff that affects the way that groups collaborate, the way that people organize, that lives outside of the computer, and I got really interested in like what's all the stuff happening outside of the computer, sorry. And community is one of the answers. So like, I became much more interested in questions like, like culture. How do we, what are our expectations of each other? What are our habits and our rituals and our beliefs and our shared norms? And like, what do we do? You mentioned conflict, Penguin. Like what happens when two people come into a conflict with each other and they bump heads and it's not obvious like how to resolve that? How do we respond? And all of those questions for me are like social questions, they're interpersonal questions, they're cultural questions, they're almost like psychological. And so the Microsolidarity project kind of emerged from that process of me getting more curious about the human layer, the layer zero, like the stuff before all of the computers come online, but just the way that we relate to each other. So now I call Microsolidarity a community building practice, or some people think of it as like a framework. It's like it's a roadmap, an open source design pathway for building high trust communities. And when I say high trust community, like when I use the word community, I've got something specific in my mind. I don't mean like if someone says, we've got a community of 20,000 people in our Discord, that to me, it's not really a community. That's a crowd of mostly anonymous people, or we've got a community of 50,000 token holders, or there's a kind of loose or shallow definition of community that I don't really connect with. When I say community, I mean I'm thinking about the people who bring you soup when you're not well. Like the people that you want to go on a road trip with, the people that you can borrow money from when you're in a tight spot. So like I'm thinking about a much smaller, more high trust definition of community rather than this like kind of vague computer term. And I've been really, I think tremendously privileged and blessed and lucky to have had some powerful community experiences. For the last 11 or 12 years now, I've been part of a community called N-Spiral. And N-Spiral is like, it's fluctuated between 100 and 200 people. We're a network of friends who are all interested in doing meaningful work, doing things on purpose, like using our time and energy to work on stuff that matters rather than just having a soul-sucking job. And we're also interested in decentralized organizing and working together without this traditional command and control hierarchy. And in that network of a couple of hundred people, there's just been dozens and dozens of different projects and companies and like small ventures and lots of experiments and ways of organizing. And that community over the last 10 or 12 years for me has been such an essential ingredient in my well-being and my sense of belonging, my sense of purpose, these like fundamental human needs. And so the question for me is like, okay, it's awesome that I get to enjoy this like amazing community called N-Spiral, where I get my belonging needs and my purpose needs are met there. But it only works because it's small scale, like you can't really scale that very high trust, intimate relationships. You can't do that with 50,000 people. You can only do that with 100 or 200 people at the very maximum. And so Microsolidarity is like, how could we make many, many N-Spirals? Like assuming that there's many people out there that would love more sense of connection, more sense of belonging, more sense of purpose, more sense of solidarity, like people having your back, people that care about you and are invested in you for the long term. They're going to have your back for a long time. Like assuming there's lots of people out there that want that, and they can't all fit in one community. What's a roadmap for them to follow? So that's the Microsolidarity project, and it's it's like the result of more than a decade of thinking and practice. So it's hard for me to download the whole thing in a short space of time. I would point people to the website microsolidarity.cc, where we have all of the open source resources and practices and theory and podcasts and videos and all that sort of stuff. I wonder what's the most useful thing, maybe a little bit about what Microsolidarity communities look like. There's a couple of dozen of these communities around the world at the moment, and many more coming online. And I have the privilege of like connecting to all these communities and supporting them and recognizing what are the patterns in their experience. And the reason it's called micro is because it's so much focused on the small scale. It's so much focused on what I call the crew. In Web3 terms, you might have heard of pods or squads, this idea that there's like a small, tight-knit band of people. They're the ones that get shit done. In most DAOs and most organizations, like there's always these very small, tight-knit teams that are where the real action is. Not even organizations, but like at a conference, for example, usually the good shit happens in these little clusters of like 3 or 4 people. That's where the real magic happens. That's where the fun is. That's where the insight, the new ideas, The sense of enthusiasm and inspiration all seems to happen at that small scale. And so this thing that I call the crew, this smallest unit, like 3, 4, 5 people, that's the essential building block of a microsolidarity community. And so, yeah, whether you're in a DAO or at a conference or at some kind of festival that you love, if you wanted more microsolidarity, if you wanted more sense of belonging and purpose and enthusiasm and collaboration and purpose and so on, the way to get there is to find your crew. And it's sort of like that's the mission that I invite people on when they're entering into a new group, is like, so, okay, there's 500 people here and they're all exciting and you've got some shared interests and some enthusiasm about meeting them. But who are the 3 or 4 people that you're really going to form this tight knit little crew with? The focus on crews, I think, has emerged from so much of the community building and organizational design work that I've done over the last decade, finding how people routinely, it's really common that like someone will come into a community and they'll have this like peak experience of enthusiasm and excitement. They meet all these people and they're like, wow, I found my tribe. Maybe it's like a festival or something like that. I found my tribe. I feel like I really belong here. This is so great. And then like 2 weeks later, once they've gone back home and they've come back to their normal life and kind of nothing significant has really changed for them, then there's this like huge crushing come down, this like really painful hangover, like the contrast between, oh, I felt like I had something, and then it turns out to be empty. Like that's really painful for people. So that's one of the reasons that I'm always recommending people find their crew, because like if you did get inspired, if you did get excited about connecting with a new community, there needs to be some kind of vehicle or some kind of structure to take that peak experience of enthusiasm and translate it into actual life changes, like to change your quality of life, to change what your livelihood, what your work, what your day-to-day reality looks like. That's like a long-term project that might take multiple years. And if you're just trying to do that on your own, you're probably gonna lose your train of thought, lose your courage, lose your sense of direction and inspiration. But if you've got a crew with you, if you've got a small group of people that you're having some kind of regular cadence, some kind of regular check-in point, you're much more likely to stay the course, and you're much more likely to be able to observe over sequential months, like, oh yeah, my life actually is progressively coming more and more towards this new direction that I got inspired about. Like there's actually a mechanism for integrating that peak experience into a change in your life. That's one of the reasons that I love crews. Maybe one more thing to say before I would love to take, like I said, I'd love to take questions. One of the things that's difficult about community building, one of the problems or the bottlenecks or the things that kind of trips people up, is when you start to get to know some people, you might like invite them. Oh yeah, I heard about this crewing thing. I want to start a crew. I want to find my people. And you invite them into some, you might have a first meeting or a first couple of meetings, and then there's just not great chemistry, or like after 3 weeks or after 5 weeks or something, you kind of notice we're not quite a perfect match. Maybe our priorities are not quite aligned, or the time, even the time zones don't match properly, or there's it's like not quite the right match. And that can be extremely awkward. Like often what happens in that context is that the group will just slowly peter out. It'll just like lose steam, and one by one people will stop showing up so much, and then it kind of like falters, and can be really awkward and unpleasant. And so one of the things we emphasize in the Microsolidarity set of practices is the idea of time-limited commitments. So like, okay, I'm interested in starting a new group. I'm looking for collaborators. I'm looking for peers to support me on this journey. Would you join me for 3 meetings or 5 meetings, over the course of 5 weeks, and invite people into that very time-bound commitment where it's easy to say yes or no. And then at the end of that period, say it's 5 weeks, then at the end you stop and you review and you say like, was this a good use of our time? Do we like meeting each other? Do we feel like there's something here? Do we want to keep going? Do we want to change? Maybe we want to keep meeting, but the format's not really good. We need some different kind of processes, or there's some different way of organizing. Or do we want to stop? And it provides like a natural way to like gracefully close without losing face, without having this awkward, embarrassing, like clumsy, I feel I don't want to show up anymore. Like, that kind of helps with the efficiency of the friend dating process, the crewmate finding process. So that's like a really essential practice, is this like time limited commitment. Then you stop and review and you decide if we're going to keep going or not, we're going to keep going or not. And you just go for bigger and bigger loops until you find the people that are your forever people, the people that are really committed on the long term. So that's like my rapid fire download. But yeah, like I said, I'd love to hear some questions, Penguin, if you've got some yourself or anything that's coming in on the stream.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the big things that you talked about is that the number of people that you have does not make a community. Crowd does not equal community. And I think you also really touched on some of the things that a lot of people in DAOs feel. You mentioned right now you're floating between 100 and 200 people, like standard Dunbar number. After that many people, the congregation kind of falls apart, and it goes back to the large mass of people where it's hard to communicate what people are doing. It's more like a mass of people. I think so I checked out the website as well. I really like the flow from like self to partnership to crew as well. It shows like whenever we kind of like build a purpose and a meaning, we start with one goal, and like we got to be there kind of dancing, like the dancing guy. And then after a little while, you get your other dancing guy, and then people feel more comfortable to join. As you say, like there's that friction and kind of like barrier that people have got to overcome before they align with a purpose or a meaning. And like part of that is like finding other people that are engaged with that. Talk about like how you start building that crew on like a personal level, and like what are some of the things that people can do to find their meaning and like go start dancing alone for like that self part too.
Yeah, I love the dancing image, right? Like I've seen the video, the first follower, that's the first follower effect. And it's a great example because actually what's happening there, I think, is one person dancing on their own is not very attractive. But two people dancing with each other is very attractive because it's like, oh, that looks fun. Those two are having fun with each other. And so you're making me recognize, like, rather than one person saying, hey, I'm excited about this and I want to invite a bunch of people in, often it can actually be more attractive to have two people who already have a good relationship, who already have trust, who already have some sense of like shared identity or shared purpose or like just good vibes. And they can invite a couple of people in. So you've already got that like pre-established, that feeling of being relaxed, or like, okay, we know each other, we're good together, and we can invite one or two people to join us. So that I think is actually a really, really smart place to start, is like know who's your pre-existing relationship, and then invite more people into that context. On the Dunbar thing, I think it's important for people to get that. As far as I understand, like I'm not an academic, I don't know this really, really deeply, but my understanding of Dunbar is that there's Dunbar's numbers, it's plural. And so it's like, if you think about it roughly from like 5 people, 15, 50, 150, 500, 1,500, 5,000, just an infinitely long list, repeating at those steps, that each one of those steps, when you have humans at these different scale, groups of different scale, they become almost like different organisms. So like a group of 5 people is good for some stuff. There's stuff that you can only do with 5 that you can't do with 150, and vice versa. And so like part of what we're trying to do is like help people to understand what's the appropriate scale, like to develop this literacy of scales, like groups of different size are good for different things. So if you're starting out and you're not like really experienced with organizing a lot of people, probably don't start public. Don't invite 5,000 people to come over, start small, start with 5 and develop some competence there. And, like a simple place to start is, for example, a reading club. We're all excited about this book or this podcast, or we take an online course together and we're like having a couple of check-ins a week or something, where we're like just giving each other reminders and support and encouragement as we're going through this online course. It can be very, very lightweight. It doesn't have to be like a massive ambitious thing. It's more like developing the rhythm and the habit of showing up for each other and talking about the stuff that you actually care about, being there for each other. And then you can progressively get more ambitious, from the online course to like hey, I've got a project that I'm working on, I'd love some support. And what you'll find on the Microsolidarity website is a bunch of like specific group processes for like, this is a really good way to activate peer coaching and peer advice. That's not just people's habitual way of communicating, but a bit more structure that gets people at more insightful feedback from other people, for example. And then over time, you might progressively get towards like, hey, I've got this idea for a software project or a company that I want to start. And then those are going to be your ideal collaborators or potential co-founders. So that's one path, is like getting deeper and deeper and deeper with the same group. The other path is expanding horizontally. So maybe you've got some really good vibes going, and there's like 30 people that are interested. You can't all put, like if you have a meeting with 30 people, you need a bunch of structure and process and facilitation and agenda and stuff. And it's not the same kind of light, easy thing that you had when there was only 4 of you. So in that case, scaling horizontally means, okay, yes, we've got something good going on, but the job is to get everyone into crews. So that larger group becomes like a dating pool where people can find their crewmates, and they can start their own rhythm of meeting and their own focal point, their own purpose, their own particular flavor, their own set of principles. And you might find that you get like 3 or 4 or 5 crews operating in parallel. And that in Microsolidarity terms is what we call a congregation. It's like that's the larger community, which goes up to about 150 people. And if you've got that scale with like lots of these small groups, it's an incredibly efficient and powerful and really inspiring environment to be in, because everyone's, like I say, got their slightly different focal points, but they're all heading in a broadly aligned direction. And it's super inspiring to know that, okay, yeah, there's my little club over here, and there's your one over there, and your one over there, and they all add up to something much bigger.
Yeah, I've been part of a lot of different companies before stepping into Web3, startups, medium-sized, large companies, and companies that employed kind of like this squad mechanic as well. So you see it especially for like really well-organized companies that, and also well-organized DAOs, is that a squad of 5 people can do a lot of power. And as you say, if you have a few different squads operating autonomously, like they don't have to be reporting to some kind of boss, they get to do whatever they need to do to complete their meaning and purpose. And if you have a few different powerful groups working together towards common goals, a lot gets done.
I think I would just want to add on that, because you mentioned in the intro that one of the topics we're talking about today is conflict. And I wanted to mention that because I've just seen some kind of high-profile Web3 conflict hitting Twitter today, and one of the reasons that I emphasize so much these like nested circles of group identity is that ideally conflict can be solved at the smaller scale. So like if you and I have a bump into each other and have a little awkward moment, maybe we can resolve it directly, but often that's kind of awkward and not that likely to work. And so if you and I are in a crew, then we can bring it to the group and say, hey, look, we need some support. This thing has been going on. We need some mediation, or we need some empathy, or we need someone to kind of mediate this conversation between us. Or if that doesn't work, if our crew can't solve it, then there should be one larger circle that we can go to and get some accountability and some support at that next scale, and so on, up and up and up until rather than what we often see, there's like this lurking conflict between the 2 of us. There's some informal, murky backroom kind of trying to fix it in the background. It doesn't really work, and we don't feel like there's any path to getting justice or getting accountability or getting support. And so we go public, and then it's like this massive scandal and drama, and usually nobody comes out with support. Yeah.
I definitely have felt that as well. And yeah, the best thing that I've seen is open communication, as you say, bringing it and kind of containing it. Obviously, if people are in conflict and direct conflict with each other, the ability for them to work it out is kind of pivotal. But working on the internet, we can't really control a lot of times who we're working with, and sometimes it's not our friend. It's not someone that is willing to kind of meet us in the middle. So having that process and like we're going to go to our circle first, so that it doesn't blow up into a giant problem is definitely something that people should do.
And there's different kinds of conflict, right? Like there's the conflict which is this person's an asshole and they've been misbehaving, they've been mistreating me, and that you just need to resolve. You need some kind of like process for cleaning that up or excluding that person or something. But then there's the other kind of conflict, which is very, very common, which is like we just have different priorities or different values or a different way of seeing. We're just interested in different things, or we've got different personality. And what we really need is just to be in different crews. Like we just need to be in this is the environment that's more anarchist, and this is the environment that's more communist, or whatever is your flavor. Like that you've got a space that you can, be with like-minded people and have that like I say, you're part of a bigger group that has some coherence. But a lot of the drama and difficult decisions that happen in DAOs is because everyone's trying to agree on something where they could actually quite happily coexist and disagree if they had different pods to be in.
Yeah, I think it might have been Dennis Leary that said, for a successful marriage, you guys don't have to like the same things; you just have to dislike the same things. And I think that the same thing is true, right? If we're working together, you don't, as you say, there are other parts and other crews that people can be in that they'll have a better connection with people. And if we have too large of a group of people that aren't really all grooving together, that's kind of when, communication breaks down. Then you are only speaking to the masses. So by forming these tighter knit groups, these basically micro DAOs or sub DAOs or Microsolidarity organizations, then it helps actually support the larger organization because people have better support. Very cool. I love the framework. Do you say you've been working on this since Occupy?
Well, essentially, yeah, because as soon as I found the Inspiral community, I got very enthusiastic and excited about how does this thing work? How is it that we have this community of mutual support where people are, really investing in each other and taking care of each other. And for a long time, I would answer every phone call from people that were curious about, tell me more about how Inspiral works, and I was talking to people in entrepreneurial communities and collectives all over the world and telling them again and again about like all this. They would say, what happens when there's a conflict, or like, how do you guys handle money, or like, what's your decision-making system? And as I got these like frequently asked questions, that's when I started to formulate, okay, there's actually a set of patterns here, like that there's actually like a limited set of common failure modes of collaborative groups. And it's like your decision-making system, your conflict management system, your money allocation system. There's like a couple of like key pieces that consistently trip people up over and over and over again. And any one of them, if you get it wrong, is enough to like destroy the whole enterprise. But it's actually a finite list. There's like 8 things or 10 things you need to get right. And if you've got those things right, then you can really achieve really ambitious and exciting things. So that was the kind of background context of me. Just trying to like pay attention to what was working in our context and what other people were finding difficult, and coming up with like, what are the strategies, the tactics, the tools, the practices, the frameworks, the methodologies, the books, the ways of thinking, all that stuff. How do we export the stuff that works and set people up so that if they're going to initiate something new, it's likely to go well?
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the other things you touched on before we go to the next speaker that is very relevant is that people like to build, and if you get stuck on something for too long, the purpose and the meaning kind of goes away. So it is important that people have these different groups so that people that need to step away can step away. And as we've seen in some other protocols, the main goal is to have the community kind of own it from the start. So that way, the crews that are supporting it and the teams that are supporting it, if the main goal is for them to completely step away and for the community to kind of own it in the end. So I think by building effectively and by building the strategy from the start and making these teams effective, it works towards the common goal and for the community's benefit. So thank you so much, Richard. Microsolidarity.cc is the website. Where else should people go to learn more?
Yeah, go to the website. There's a lot of material. I've been publishing a lot of interviews and conversations on YouTube and podcasts and stuff. You'll get all the links there. And then the other place is just chat with me on Twitter, Rich Decibels, and don't send me a DM, but do mention me. Do jump into my replies. I really love talking about this stuff. So if people have got any kind of organizing questions, community questions, DAO questions, hit me up. I'd love to hear about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Ciao.